Hi, everyone. I'd love to just make this as interactive as possible, actually. So, like, as I'm talking, just interrupt me or put up a hand or ask whatever question. Matt and I talked about this a little bit in terms of subject matter and everything, but guide me in the direction you like. I'll just start by telling you a little bit about myself. I grew up in the US. I dropped out of high school when I was 15 and went to work at a startup. Probably 6 months later or something like that, I kind of like hung out at home and did nothing for about 6 months. And then went to work at a startup, and I've kind of been building stuff on the internet ever since, for like 25 years now or something. Most recently, well, I'll kind of give you the story. So, went to work at a startup, did that for a couple of years as an engineer. That was in Connecticut, and then I moved to New York, and I worked at some kind of random places. I worked at like the National Hockey League for a little while. I'm not a hockey fan. I just kind of like showed up and started writing code there. I actually had this experience. The reason why I ended up there, it was 2001, and the economy had, like the dot-com economy had completely crashed. Like every startup had gone out of business, and it was the first time, like as a programmer, there was just like no work. And I found a list of recruiters on the internet, and there were about 25, 30, 40 of them, and I just called every single one of them, and everybody was like, sorry, we like don't have anything. One person said, we have a job for you at the bus depot, writing like bus dispatching software for the MTA, which is like the local transit authority. And I was like, I really I'm gonna put that one to the side for a moment and maybe not do that right now. And then one of them was the NHL, and I just went and interviewed and got the job, and I did that for a couple of years, and then I started a company in New York called Blip, doing online video, and ran that for about 5 years, raised a bunch of money, and like built it, and it didn't like go as well as we had hoped it would. We didn't take over the world, but you know, we got somewhere, and we ended up merging with another company, and then Disney bought that. And then I went to Facebook, and I worked at Facebook for 4.5 years. I moved to California, and I started out working in product there, and then I moved over to the ads team after the IPO, and ran ads product for 2.5 years after the IPO, and then moved here. My wife is English, so I met her in New York. I dragged her to California. She doesn't like it when I put it like this, but it's kind of true. I dragged her to California, and then she was like, oh, sorry. I dragged her to California, and then she was like, oh, I don't like it here, you know, and so we moved here about 10 years ago. I stayed with Facebook. I ran sharing product for a while, so photos, text, video, links, like all that kind of stuff, everything in newsfeed, and then went to Deliveroo, whereas ran engineering and product and marketing, and then Monzo, which was my first real exposure to Fintech. So I was the chief product officer at Monzo for a couple of years, and now I have a startup building like a global Venmo or like WhatsApp for money on top of Solana, like the Solana blockchain, the stable coins. So the way it works, it like works in 75 countries now. You can add money really easily with like a local payment method, so like a debit card or Pix or M-Pesa or whatever in any of those 75 countries, and then you can like send it to somebody else who could remove it with a local payment method. And it's just like very fast and very cheap. So that's my like background. Does that all make sense? And I think what Matt wanted me to do was just like talk about some principles that have like done well for me over the years, and you know, that may be useful to you. I think the first one is that like in everything that I've just described, I've never had a plan for doing any of those things. I've always just done the thing in front of me that I felt like was the most valuable thing I could do for like myself or others at the company that I worked at. And I haven't always been rewarded for that by any stretch of the imagination, but I often have. And like the most important things I've ever done in my career have involved like running into a burning building, like doing a thing that nobody wanted to do, and like doing a good job at it. And then I like talk about, there's this thing I call it the competency trap. So you like do that, and people are like happy, and they know that you didn't want to do that, and nobody else wanted to do it. And then they like give you another hard problem, and they just keep giving you hard problems until you fail. And And that's like a very powerful thing. And one of the hardest problems I've ever worked on, like a very concrete example of this, is when I was at Facebook, one of the things I worked on was like insights and measurement. And I realized at some point that all of our insights and measurement were broken. And the way that I knew this was we were looking at a very large number of posts that had more likes, comments, and shares than the number of people who had seen the post, which is impossible because those are like, unique actions that couldn't, it's just like, it is absolutely impossible. And so I like got a group of, 6 engineers in a room with a giant spreadsheet for a month and audited every single event in every mobile app and every version of the website, which was insane. And we ended up with a spreadsheet of thousands and thousands and thousands of rows, every single view event you could possibly have on every post, every single like, every comment, every share on every version of every app and every surface, and then went and fixed it all. And it sucked, and there was no glory in it. It was unbelievably boring and monotonous and terrible. And we were in this room with like a garage door that opened into the the middle of the center of the campus and all this stuff, and we couldn't be at our regular desks and all this stuff. But at the end, we could say all of our data is good now, and we fixed all of it, and we can send out an email to like all of our advertisers and all of our page owners and say it's all fixed. And off the back of that, I just kept getting more and more and more and more stuff to do, and I can't emphasize enough how important that is. I didn't go into that thing thinking like, oh, I'm going to get promoted as a result of having done this work. It was just like clear that it needed to be done. If it wasn't done, like bad things were going to happen. And it was also very clear that like nobody else was going to do it. So we just went and did it. And I think that one observation I have of organizations generally is not enough people go and do that sort of thing. And I can't tell you how appreciated it is when people do. I've been on both sides of that, and it's just very important. So that's a thing, Go and do the hard work, run into the burning building, solve the hard problems, and be okay with failure. And this is another thing that I think that people just, there's a very, very, very common mistake. You think, oh, I don't want to take risk, because if I take risk, I am going to fail, and if I fail, I'm going to get fired, or whatever. That's not how it works, not at good companies. At good companies, you're rewarded for taking the risk, and you're evaluated for the quality of the work that you put in on the hard thing, which is like a very, very different thing. And when you do hard things, you're going to fail, like some of the time. I have probably failed at more than half of the things that I have done. It's probably more like 90%, I don't know. And that's totally fine as long as you have like worked hard, been diligent, put in like good work and done it from a place of good intent. You can be rewarded for that, Like the number of things that I've shipped that haven't worked, and I've come back and said, oh, well, it didn't work, and here's why we were wrong. These are the incorrect assumptions that we made. These were the guesses that were wrong, and now we're going to do it differently, or actually I think we should just shut this entire thing down. Like that is a good thing, and not enough people do that. Not enough that people admit when something is not working, and not enough people take the risk where they ever have to admit in their life that anything they did didn't work. So that is just like another thing that I think is unbelievably important. And another lesson that I've learned over time is the way to prioritize the way that you orient your effort and you think about your impact. And in a professional setting, impact is, in my view, like the most important thing, right? Impact is the difference in the world, or whatever your scope is, between what existed and would exist without your action and your existence, and what exists as a result of your existence and your action, right? So you can imagine that, you can imagine, for example, that you might have like a user growth graph, just like a graph of the number of users you have, and it has a slope and it has a shape, and then you did something that changed the shape of the graph, it inflected the graph. That's your impact. Or you can imagine like a cost graph, or an error graph, or like any of these things, any of these measurable things. Your impact is the difference between what would have happened without doing anything, you doing anything, and what did happen. And there are like lots of different ways to think about impact, and lots of different ways to prioritize your actions. One way is to prioritize your own career outcomes and say, oh, I want to get promoted, or I want to get a raise, or I want to like get this other job or whatever. Another way is to prioritize the company's outcomes. So to say, oh, I want to increase gross profit, or the goal this year is increasing users. I want to increase users. And a third way is to prioritize the customer and to say, oh, I want to drive better outcomes for our customers. I want them to have a better thing that they use. I want to make a difference in their life. I want to have impact in their life. I want them to be able to budget better, or know how much to spend on groceries, which was an example from earlier. Or I want them to be able to accomplish this thing which is important in their life with half the effort as before, or for less money or whatever. Those are three ways that you can imagine orienting your effort in a work context, right? Maybe another one might be optimizing your colleagues and their happiness or whatever. I would encourage you as much as possible to always optimize for the customer. Always. Within the bounds of what is commercially reasonable and creating a successful company. I would encourage you to essentially never optimize for your own career. And if you work at a place that does not reward you for prioritizing the customer in your own career and your salary, you should quit and go find another job, because that place sucks. You shouldn't work there. It's like that simple. Like, life is too short. If you prioritize the company, if you optimize for the company's output, that's okay. It's kind of okay. But I promise you, obviously, at the limit, some of these things may not always be true. But I promise you that it is almost always true that optimizing for the customer within some bounds of what is commercially reasonable will result in better outcomes for the company than if you start from the position of optimizing for the company. And if you work at the right company, it will again yield better outcomes for you than any alternative. Yes? A concrete example of what optimizing for customers is like a choice that you might make for customers? Yeah. Oh, I'll give you a great example. So this is an old one. I think it's old enough that I can tell this story. So when I started working on Facebook ads, we had no idea if they worked. And they actually probably didn't. The only ads that we had, this is a very long time ago, were in the right rail of the website. So we had no ads in the feed at the time. And we had lifted and shifted the Google ads entirely into Facebook, and they're totally different products. So you go to Google and you type in what you want, and then it shows you an ad for what you want, and then you click on it and they charge money to the advertiser. It's like a scam. It's unbelievable. It's like the best business model ever invented. We took that and tried to put it in a thing where you don't tell anyone what you care about or what you're looking for or anything. Facebook is passive attention, and the interesting thing is who you are. So the entire premise of the ads was wrong. They were off to the side, and they were small, just like a Google ad, and not very noticeable. And they weren't clicked on all that much, but people paid per click, which also a little bit of a mistake. So immediately after the IPO, revenue was not growing fast enough. And so somebody had the really brilliant idea of making the white space in the ad clickable, which worked for about 2 months. So it led to something like 15% more clicks, which led to 10% more revenue, and it did work until the auction. It's an auction. Everybody realized what was happening, and auctions do what auctions do, and the entire revenue boost went away. And I don't know, it was 2.5 months later. So it kind of made the quarter, which was good, but it did not move the company forward in any way whatsoever. Maybe it propped up the stock price for a few extra weeks or something like that. And actually it was pretty destructive from a morale standpoint. People were standing around joking about it, oh well, this product is so shitty that the only way that we're going to make more money is by making the white space clickable. And if you do too much of that, people just stop buying stuff from you. It doesn't work. I think at the limit again, ads on X have done all of these tricks, not just since Elon bought it, but since before that, and they suck, and that's like a large part of the reason why. They haven't optimized for the advertisers' goals and interests. So what we ended up doing instead was saying, well, what is it that advertisers care about? Well, they want to sell product. They either want to sell a product or they want to, affect an attitudinal change in a person. They want an attitudinal change or behavioral change. And so we just built a ton of tools to help them measure whether or not our ads were driving attitudinal or behavioral change. And to the extent that they weren't, we then changed the ads so that they were, because now we had the data. And by switching everything to optimizing for the advertiser's interests, we built I think like a pretty amazing business, which then harmed users because we were showing a bunch of ads, but then what we did was we said, okay, well, we're going to have an engagement penalty. So if it's a bad ad, we're actually going to make the advertiser pay more. So we kind of like designed a system that, tried to balance the interests of both of those parties, and very explicitly never optimized for revenue. Never. It worked great.
Did you go to university?
I did not go to university. I didn't go to college. I dropped out of high school when I was 15. So my highest level of education attained is 9th grade. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about overcoming lots of failures throughout your career and lots of obstacles, hurdles. But I guess, what does success look like to you, and how do you expect that to change then?
What does success look like?
Yeah, in today's
I wish I knew. I have no idea.
Or value, or.
I just really enjoy building cool stuff. Like I just really enjoy solving hard problems, and I think that this is a bit of a cliche, and please forgive me, but the journey is just really fun. Like I'm doing the startup. I'm like 2.5 years in now. It's unbelievably difficult in every possible way. Like everything about it is hard, but it's also really rewarding, and we're like solving really hard problems. And even if we fail, which we may very well, I mean, we could easily fail. We'll have invented a lot of cool stuff along the way, and built things of quality that we're proud of, and solved a lot of problems and all that stuff. And that it would still hurt to not get there, but that experience would be kind of amazing. And we have 20 people who are on their for most of them, second, third, fourth company working together now, and everybody enjoys each other's company and working together and all that stuff. And it's a joy. And, if it works at the level that we want it to work at, oh, it's amazing. Everybody will look at it and be like, oh, it's super successful. If it fails, it'll still have, we'll all have learned a lot and enjoyed the last few years and all that kind of stuff. And I think, to be honest, that's one of the secrets to life, is just to, focus on that, focus on the work, and not focus on the outcome. It's very important when you're doing work to be outcome focused, in the sense that you have a goal, a thing that you want to achieve, that if I ship this thing, this is the thing that I wanted to do or whatever. But I think in life, in many ways, that's a mistake. The trick is to, enjoy the thing that you do every day, and know that the thing that you're doing is creating value for the world. If all you're doing is I'm trying to come up with a truly empty example. I was going to say arbitraging, whatever, which is a classic example of a worthless thing. But arbitrage can actually be a useful thing. It can create value in the world, so it might not even be the right example. But you'll all know, if you're doing a thing, you're pressing a bunch of buttons that is not creating any value in the world or is destroying value in the world, you should stop doing it and go and find something else that creates value.
So what's value to you, I guess, in that sense?
I don't know, things that just make people's lives better. Yeah.
You said you dropped out quite early in your life, and I was just wondering if that posed major obstacles for you in your career, and if it did, what were some ways you combated?
Yeah, so the question is whether or not dropping out created obstacles. The answer is not really, because at the time that I dropped out, and I mean, it's interesting to think about this, and what this is true of now. So at the time that I dropped out, there were not all that many programmers who knew how to build certain classes of things. And I was self-taught, and my brother had got me into computers when I was very young, and my uncle worked in a bank IT department, and so he gave me the old computers that they were going to throw out, and then I built my own, and I learned how to program and all this stuff. And so I could bring a concrete skill somewhere that people would pay me to do. And when I started doing it, I really sucked at it. I was terrible. you know, really, really, really bad. But you just kind of like learn as you go. And I remember my interview at the National Hockey League where I went in and, you know, the guy, it was this guy Grant Nodine, who's, you know, great guy, and he like read my resume and everything, and then we just chatted for 45 minutes, and at the end I was like, and then he offered me the job, and I was like, you can like interview me at all? And he was like, nah, you'll either sink or you'll swim. And it was great. And I, you know, in some categories of work, I think that is probably still possible, and in some categories of work that's probably not possible. In software engineering, I think at the limit it's probably still possible. I think you can probably be self-taught and like the proof is in the pudding and either you can do a good job or not. But now there are so many CS graduates that it's like harder to get in the door that way than it used to be. But I'm sure there are like other categories of work that you can imagine where like you can just do that. It was funny the first time when I went to work at Facebook, like I went to work as a product manager, I had no idea what a product manager was. And they were like, well, you're already doing the job. But it like wasn't a job at the time. You know, there were like a very limited number of companies, mostly in the Valley, who had that kind of job and described it that way. And so you could just like walk in. They didn't teach it in school, you know. I think they still barely teach it in school. So I think the trick is to find things like that and be kind of good at them.
So you said you worked in California and here. Why do you think California is so concentrated in terms of startups compared to the UK?
Why is California so concentrated in terms of startups compared to the UK? There are two answers. One is because the defense industry and the aerospace industry, all the way back in kind of like the 50s and 60s and everything, built a lot in California. I'm not sure if it's working anymore.
There's a lot.
Oh, maybe, yeah, we're back. Built a lot in California, and then like, you know, all of these companies grew out of that, and there is a unbelievable like reinforcing gravitational pull to that sort of thing. So like, when we moved into our new office, it was the old Sun Microsystems office, and we like left all the Sun Microsystems signs up, and you know, right down the street is like Bill Gurley at Benchmark, and you know, Travis at Uber is just up the road, and all this stuff, and everybody's there, and you can move from company to company, and half the people who went to Facebook were previously at Google, and you know, the people who were at Google were previously at wherever, and you know, that's just unbelievably powerful, and you can't get away from those kind of like network effects. They just, once they become established, they're self-perpetuating. The other answer is culture. So in the United States, most people invest, a lot of people invest in the stock market. Nobody would leave large amounts of cash sitting in their bank. They invest it in companies. Everybody has a 401k. There's a very strong public market. Regulators generally take an approach of like waiting to see how an industry develops before regulating it, and often don't regulate at all, or just go after people who act badly. Most people are willing to take more risk and fail more, and those kind of cultural differences, together with taxes and a bunch of other things, you know, make the US like an incredible place to have a startup. And the UK is not as good a place to have a startup in all of those ways, combined with what's going on with the Valley. And that is just a fact. And it is a changeable fact. It is a thing that everyone in this room can contribute to changing, because half of what I named are personal, cultural differences. They're choices that you can make. Half of the problem is that people here don't take enough risk. You know, you're not willing to like go out and just try something and do something and fail. And that's something that is not dictated by the government, the person next to you, or your parents, or whatever. It's just like your choice. And I can promise you that if you like go and start a company, or you go and work at an early stage company that may go out of business in 6 months or a year or whatever, you will not come out of that experience worse than you went into it. You will learn more in a shorter period of time, even if that thing like becomes a steaming crater in the ground, a smoking crater in the ground. You will be better and more employable at the end of that period than you were when you went in, and compared to the opportunity cost of going to work at a big bank or whatever, you know, there's just like no question. And so that's the only way these things change, you know, and that's the only way that you build those network effects and you develop those companies. And there are a limited number of companies here where, you know, the founders went and took those risks, and people took those risks early on and they worked out. And the people who worked at those companies, first of all, have better careers than they would have otherwise. In many ways, they have lives, their lives have changed. And a bunch of them have made millions of dollars. And so the upside is like really high, and the downside, sorry, I'm probably getting just like shunted off the stage. And the downside is really low, if you think about it. So it can change. You should do it.
Time for one last question.
One last question.
Can you like everyone's in a similar kind of time of their career. A lot of people like last year at university or looking for jobs. Can you give one or maybe a few pieces of advice for them?
First and second jobs, I think, are probably initially very important, and then when you look back many years later, probably don't matter. Like the choice you make doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does now, and so I would try to take some of that pressure. I try to take some of that pressure off in the first instance and relax, and like if you make a bad choice, it's going to be fine. What you're going to do then is you're going to quit or get fired and then go work somewhere else, and it's going to be fine, And one of the secrets to making good decisions is not stressing out too much about them. You just have to find the right level. And I guess, one thing that I think is there are two extremes that you can choose that both are valid and great. One is, and excuse the American expression here, you can go and play for the Yankees. So you can go and work at like the best company in whatever category, in whatever seat, in whatever role is available, and it doesn't really matter who they are, but if they're like excellent at what they do, it will be like one of the best decisions you could possibly make. Facebook at the time that I went to work there, like was and still is one of the best run, like unbelievable companies in the world, in so many different ways, and the amount that I learned there is just unreal. And there are equivalent companies that you could choose to go to work for now, and you will never regret that decision, because you will just learn so much, and you will learn what excellence looks like, you will learn what it means to work with top-notch colleagues who are smart and dedicated and work hard and make good decisions. So that is an option. The other option is to do something small and scrappy, or yourself, or join an early stage startup as a customer service person or an intern or whatever, and learn there. The danger there is that a lot of early stage startups kind of suck and people don't know what they're doing, and so you have to kind of pick well and make sure that they have like a good vision and that they know what they're doing and that they have a good way of talking about it, and that the quality of the product is good, because at that stage the only thing that really matters is the product. All of the other things don't matter. And so if you play with the product and it blows you away and you're like, this is a well-built, well-conceived, like this is good and it solves a problem for people, that's a great choice too. And those are just like two extremes to think about. I think often the thing in the middle is just a little bit of a waste of time.